process meaning the focus on an experience for the group without an external audience, and product, theatre work, theatre-based work. Now, this has long been a kind of division in the drama world. And yet, we've also been talking a long time about what this division doesn't really exist. I saw an article that Cecily wrote in the 1980s where she said, well, I hope we're beyond that now. But I don't think we are, because I think that division exists. And it's strange to me, but I think it's true that to a significant extent, at least with secondary school drama, Dorothy Heathcote's name has been marginalised. It's as if she's part of history. It's the history of the movement, but not relevant now. And when you look at the syllabus, the curriculum in England for drama, there is an emphasis on theatre skills, on performance, on genre, theatre history, theatre criticism. And I know that the same is true, if not even worse, in Scotland. And I kind of think that we shouldn't be saying to drama teachers who've got that syllabus, who've got that curriculum, and who have to teach to it, we can't simply immediately say, well, you should be doing process work. To me, anyway, it wasn't that, although Dorothy is associated with process work, for her there wasn't an either or, and that she saw things as a continuum. And that in fact, if we're doing process work, we're drawing on theatre, and theatre is a model. And in fact, the core of what she was talking about, or one of the key building blocks, was sign, the idea of sign. Sign in the theatre, the use of sign. That comes from the theatre. And she was using it in the classroom. And she was doing theatre-based work as well. She was teaching GCSE and A-level to groups. And so my hope is that we can move to a position to say to teachers, and I'm very glad that there are some student trainee teachers here today, that we can come to a point to say, well, yes, you've got a syllabus, you've got a curriculum with this emphasis on performance, but Dorothy Heathcote can be central to that as a central building block in terms of the use of sign, in terms of the idea of drama as a laboratory where we're explaining the world to each other. And how are we doing that? We're doing that through process work, we're doing that through theatre-based work. We're always explaining the world to each other. It's a crucible.
What I thought I was going to do, and it's a very UK perspective, so apologies for our visitors from overseas. It's a bit of a UK perspective, but what I've picked out are some quotations that are really important to me, and then I'll share them with you. Some of them a little negative and some of them highly positive. David said this hasn't gone away. My goodness, it hasn't gone away, and I'm afraid the crisis awaits as far as the UK is concerned. I don't think really we've grappled with how serious the situation is in our secondary and in our primary schools with regards to drama and theatre education. So I know now, I started with yesterday as I was attending the online conference. It became more and more apparent that we're still really in need of a clarity, a debate, a positioning of where drama on the continuum is, where theatre on the continuum is, how they bridge. I've always believed, the play in the nursery is part of the same process as the play at the National Theatre. I've always believed that, and it's sustained me. But there are opposing forces about that. So it is a perspective of 55 years. And I've lived really, Theo, with this definition from Gavin really of the theatre form in drama teaching. And I've been very comfortable with that the teacher uses the very elements of theatre that are normally the tools of the playwright. And that was a kind of a notion that Dorothy was working on when I worked with her in 1975. She was working on this idea of the teacher as instantaneous playwright, building for tension and building for provocation. And the second one is of a drama teacher constantly working in theatre form. So using the theatre form to enhance the experience. And I'd always been very, very comfortable with that. But then obviously things as definitions of theatre have come into play which are very different. I think when Dorothy, she spelled it out, stillness and stillness, movement, sound, silence, those 6 elements interplaying with each other. You know, I think we all were. And we knew we were using the theatre, but it had a different intention. It had a learning purpose, and it made it no less significant. Again, when a lot of her work involved people with who had a lot of their lives in wheelchairs. And Dorothy said that has an aesthetic. That has an aesthetic dimension to it as well. The wheelchairs has an aesthetic dimension within it, which is part of a theatre process. The child who doesn't speak, we know as teachers, educators, we bring to that perspective, you know, that this is part of the theatre process that we're developing. So I was really comfortable with this for the majority of my working career. So I thought we'd just remind ourselves of what actually brought the opposition a few years before this. And the opposition was, of course, Brian Way in that 1967 publication. And Brian Way was really who drove in the wedge. And it's a bigger wedge than a definition. You know, that there are 2 activities which must be confused. One is theatre, the other drama. Theatre concerned with the communication between actors and audience, drama concerned with the experience by the participants. It was bigger because Brian's philosophy was about experiential, developing children's individual traits of character, personality, developing confidence. But he didn't speak the same practice as Heathcote and Bolton. He was speaking, when he spoke and wrote about it, there were exercises, there were actor exercises. Now, a little later on, we had an opportunity, a window of opportunity, which I always regret was missed. And in Seeking Connections, Stephen Lacey and Brian Woolen, in 1989, sought out a view of drama which was about radical theatre, that it belonged to the same conceptual base and driving force as Bertolt Brecht and other playwrights who were concerned with knowledge and with change and social change. DIE does not simply intersect with theatre in interesting but often marginal ways, but is itself a form of theatre practice. It is potentially radical in terms of both the formal strategies it might employ and the nature of the issues it seeks to explore. This was one of those comfort moments for me in my career. I could say I could live with this, alongside the Bolton usage of theatre form within my teaching of learning and development of learning. But here was something that was offering me something quite different, a radical theatre form. Yes. Could I take that further? Would this reduce the division that was existing? Thank you. Thank you. And then, of course, right at the end of his career, Gavin perhaps couldn't develop this because he was drawing his career to a close in terms of drama, but proclaimed that it's all theatre. That we're all working in theatre, and the question we have to ask at every stage in the educational system is which theatre genre will be most appropriate for this particular age group, or for this particular social grouping, or the best kind of education, in which we're helping our young people to understand what it is to be human. And Gavin's quotation there came as a bit of a shock, because we'd lived a long time with Gavin's writings and definitions and articulations, but it came as a bit of a shock when he pronounced that in 2010, I think, yes, 2010, and presented that. So here now was again the drama and education world bringing together the theatre practices. So until recently, now we had in the UK, I'm sorry again if it's a little exclusive, it's not intended to be, we have a thing called Ofsted which inspects and carries out inspections, and they had some leaked guidance. And what worries me about this leaked guidance is simply this. They've got people within Ofsted who have got judgments about drama and theatre in schools. And it's not supported with evidence, it's not supported with academic study. It seems to me just to be personal viewpoints. And this is seriously concerning. So this leaked guidance, it was only an appendix because drama only appears in English according to Ofsted. But if we can quickly say, this is some of the ilk, the kind of feeling for their sentiments and their values. In the 1980s and 90s, the prevailing view in education was that the subject of drama was a tool for learning and thinking. In this form, drama did not enable students to acquire any new subject-specific disciplinary knowledge or practices. It was more about exploring one's own experiences, emotions, and social issues. The unfolding of such reflections in time and space was considered drama. This is really worrying, and it is really concerning, and their view of theatre gets worse. I'm not going to share that now, it'll take me too long. But they claim the performed play is at the heart of a drama curriculum. But of course, their examples are a very Western view as well of what that performed play might be, in a very high art, hierarchical perspective. I think this is the most worrying thing. So I've written a little bit about it in response. But of course, it was leaked. It was intended as guidance for new inspectors. But if they're going into school with this kind of view, this kind of hidden agenda, then it is really serious. They dismiss the 70s, 80s, 90s indeed as teaching approaches. And, as indeed does that book, the Drama Handbook, talks about mantle of the expert as not being in the subject of drama. Is it?
Start with two premises. This is the first, where she actually calls theatre a frame, the frame of theatre. Then, the idea of putting yourself in other people's shoes. I think it's very important to notice that she's not talking about becoming a character, but about a qualified degree of trying out aspects of being another. So it's not a complete immersion where you try on students' shoes, you experiment with stuff. That can be illustrated this way. It is, of course, kind of a crude way of putting opposites, but it's actually Dorothy's own drawings. So, but the headlines are mine. I call it Stanislavski and Brechtigen, but I take it that she wants to make the difference of being completely into something or just having a certain distance to it. So the difference between a psychological realism and, I learned a new word, where is Geoff today, indicative acting. I've always talked about representative or demonstrating or something like that stuff. This one I will just run without a comment.
Maria, will you bring your century into our century? These people are modern gardeners, as you were when you were young. In your day, you were a modern gardener. So I'm going to treat you as if you're doctors. And we also have a very famous doctor, Dr. Lister. He, of course, is not really Dr. Lister. He's going to be the portrait of Dr. Lister for us today. Now, what we're going to do every day is have a medical examination to see if the doctors have been well trained. You're not going to examine a person, you're going to be examined to see if you know about the history of medicine, you see.
So you have teacher, you have an audience, the students, and you have a character. But that can be developed a little bit further, as he does here.
Ready then?
She takes on a role.
We're ready then. From now on I shall treat you as doctors, as if you've done a medical training and you're passing the first of the important examinations that will allow you to become doctors in the National Health Service of this country. I'm very pleased to see that you came in without any bags or coats, because certainly we should have had to take them away from you.
The examination should consist of practical and written parts. All historical exhibits remain the property of the College of Surgeons.
Any questions? I fear, ladies and gentlemen, it means that if you fail this examination, you will not be able to re-sit it. But I'm quite sure that the training you've had will have thoroughly equipped you for any of the problems that you will face this week. Are you feeling nervous? Is anyone feeling nervous?
These pictures are from a visit that Dorothy made in Bergen in Norway, where I used to work. And it is a place for what at that time was called the mentally handicapped. And I vividly remember, because she negotiated with the staff, you know, what she should do, and who were the children, and they said, well, this is a group of children with no language. So there was a day of preparation before the actual workshop, and Dorothy had staff, and some of my colleagues were there, and myself, and she asked the staff, do you have royal garments type of thing? And they, yeah, we have a crown and we have a cape. And, you know, they came out with this kind of paper cutout, you know, crown and a paper faded purple type of half cape. And she held it like that and said, "This is rubbish. Throw it away." And then I had to go downtown and buy like 10 meters of colored cloth 3 times for the king, for the queen, for the princess. And then we used hours to produce these crowns. But when they eventually came into the room, they were striding. And she said, you really need to sign visually very strongly for these kids to get them in. So signing, as David said, center of theater, and jest. Brecht talks a lot about jest. It's like a social, social position, state. Right. planning and structure. Yeah. That word didactics is problematic, but in Europe, didactics is a very often used term. It doesn't mean this. It means pedagogy, actually. And I think it's a term that belongs to our field and very much to Dorothy's practice as well. And aesthetics, again, poetics doesn't mean necessarily anything about poetry. It's about style, selection of form, stuff like convention, play competence, science, and signing. Dramatic fiction, of course, we all know that. And dramaturgy is also a term that is used very much in Europe. Now it's more and more here too, I think. But for many years, when I talked about dramaturgy, what's that? It's about plot, about progression, tension, conflict, contrast, All these four things, I think Dorothy used. And they are still useful for us. So if we, just encapsulate all these things, and to me, drama is still the umbrella thing, but also, theatre, pedagogy, and children's playing. Gavin did lots of interesting things in his first book about dramatic playing, and we shouldn't forget that. This figure was much of inspiration to me when I first saw it. But gradually I have found that it became too technical. It's like the right-hand side is too much about, skills. And I'm not sure if I like the difference between performance mode and dramatic play mode as opposites. So I've taken the liberty to develop another, but based on that same, but now more inclusive. So if we look at the yellow one, no, the red one, the intention is primarily to investigate and to explore. This is process drama side. So the biggest part of it has to do with process, but there is still a touch of product in it, even if product gets smaller. So the other way around, in order to make theatre, you have to start in process. But the end side of it, the right-hand side of it, has to do with product. But if we look at this as a common denominator with this thing turning around in the middle called the axis of enactment, there shouldn't be a dichotomy.
It strikes me that in any discipline, whether that is geography, they have relationships now with climate change, climate action, sustainability, geology. In any discipline, there will always be offshoots, new developments. And we know this from Mrs. Heathcote herself. I mentioned it in my workshop. She was a divergent thinker, not convergent, divergent. She was capable of holding many concepts, many shoots at the same time and allowing them to be. And that's what mattered. I mentioned also in our group that she was generations ahead of her time, because the thinking that I heard Geoff and I heard Stig talking about, that notion of inclusion, she was writing and thinking about that, both in terms of the relationship between drama and theatre and process, product, language that wasn't that much of concern to her directly. She was writing about that 50 plus years ago, and that inclusion concept is there now in all our disciplines. And we are being charged to respond in an interdisciplinary, in a transdisciplinary fashion so that we're not seeing silos. I had a doctoral student, Kate McCarthy, if you want to look up her PhD, she's finished it in 2018, and we decided to wreck our nerves and tackle this one. So we took a philosophical lens, philosophical microscope, and we took the work of Wittgenstein. And we looked at Wittgenstein's idea of family resemblances. What connects things from a philosophical point of view? And Wittgenstein will have given examples around tools. There's the hammer is the same as the chisel. Are they both tools? What connects them? So we looked at the drama and theatre debate from Wittgenstein's notion of family resemblances. And we concluded we are a family. We are all connected, and very much as I saw in Stig's diagram there, that there are connection points, and it's about at any one time, how do you meet the needs of your learners? And that's Heathcote's vision, and that's what she guides us to do, to be responsive. So when she went over and was working with in Bergen, working with learners there that might communicate, would have different strengths, communicate and have different profiles in a multitude of ways, she looked and said, well, that won't do. So we need to respond in different ways. I heard the same in Geoff's presentation, but bringing it together. The only people who can do that are us. We are confusing those around us. I mentioned in my group as well, I'm often introduced with a wave of the hand. It's Carmel, she does drama. And they don't know quite what to say, but it is a wave of the hand. And that signifies to me that we're up in the sky somewhere, because my science colleagues are, down here. The gestures, so we read body language. So Heathcote always told us to look at sign. And I don't see sign as being just the domain of drama and theatre. I see it as being all aspects of life. Nowadays, again, she was way before her time. We're now conscious of signing, of communicating. Everything communicates. This room, the venue, every aspect of the space around you, every object communicates. And the ability to read those signs, to engage with them, is what she was asking of us many, many years ago. So the teachers have traditionally relied, as I'm doing now, unfortunately, on voice, on talking. And she had asked us 50 years ago to rely more on the body. You saw her gesturing, you saw the movement as she walked over to Dr. Lister. Let her body communicate the significance of this, and then come and join our century. That accompaniment, that use of space, of ritual, of gesture that you talked about, all of those things are now of their time. They're now coming forwards. I put it to you, because I'm conscious of your time coming in also, that rather than seeing them in disparate ways, but that it is all of it. We talk about the United Nations kind of charters and entitlements of what young people should, and children, young people, and all people. They need all of it at different times, at different stages, according to what you're covering, your individual curriculum at the time, the group you're working with. We don't give them a narrow diet. They are entitled to a full and rich diet of experiences, whether they are largely in the theatre camp at one moment, largely in the working together or the process camp at another. The big debate that's now barking at our heels is creativity. And the creativity debate for probably the last, as you're well aware, 5-7 years is now the big mandate economically, socially, from a health perspective, from a climate sustainability perspective in the world. Every government, I had a look recently, 72 of the arts councils in different countries have expressed a close connection between creativity, their education departments nationally, and the government, the finance. So money is going into creativity, and that's posing a challenge for us in arts education. That's causing a challenge to say, well, what is our role? How do we connect into that space? The only people that's worrying really is ourselves, because we're concerned that we could be diluted down. So creativity affects chair design, the lunch that you spoke about, every aspect, etc. So we need to have our voice there and be at that table as well in that inclusive fashion. So there is an opportunity there in that space. And the key word in all of those debates, we did look, sadly, at all of these documents to see is process. So process is now huge worldwide in lots of these government statements. So process is coming of its time. It is not divorced from the notion of a product. That's an artificial divide. It doesn't, it doesn't stand up when you critically unpack it. So process is really key. So when you come full circle back to where you guys started with the curriculum here in this country, and we are in the United Kingdom, we are in England, that piece, what's our job, what's our responsibility as educators, as teachers, as practitioners in that space? It is, as Stig has told us, to dissolve the process product. They're all parts of engagement, of showing interest, of being part of society. It's to dissolve those artificial divides. If we dissolve them for ourselves, we will communicate better and convince others. They're all necessary parts of how we engage with others.
Sign is something that we are reading all the time, not just literal signs, but for example, how people dress is a sign to us. Maybe we're not consciously reading it, but we are reading it all the time. And the example I like to use is that people might look at me and say, David is somebody who likes very stylish, jazzy socks. But other people who know me say, yes, well, clearly, David's wife buys his socks. And she's in the room and she can confirm this. So we're all reading signs all the time, and Dorothy would say theatre is the form that harnesses the use of sign on the stage. Everything on the stage becomes a sign that we are reading for meaning, whether we know it or not. And there was a workshop that was at Goldsmiths College, I think, that I went to with Dorothy. And she said in that workshop, if you think of the classroom as a theatre space, you can't go far wrong. And I keep that in my head all the time, because I think then, if you see, as Carmel was saying, when she comes in and she's this teacher in her robe, she's turning it into theatre. When she's bringing the Lady Maria across in the Gardens of Grantley, she's turning it into theatre. She is using theatre, she is using sign in all of those examples. And she had this idea of something that she called the self-spectator, which sounds a very odd term, but it means that you are, or the young people that we're working with are aware, increasingly become aware of what they are doing. I saw her recently give a talk about this on video, and when she said the word self-spectator, she did this, as if the spectator is here, at the back of the head. There's something that's watching what you're doing even as you're doing it. So in early stages in drama work, maybe there's not so much consciousness of what you're doing, but something like the use of sign. As people work in drama, they become more aware of using sign deliberately. And that is part of the continuum between process and performance, because obviously in performance you are consciously using sign. So through process work as well, you are learning and using the building blocks of drama and theatre. I'm going to open it up to you now, and from different contexts you have, different experiences, is this an issue that bothers you in your worlds? Is it a problem for you? So, open to you. Somebody like to start us off.
And the process is not about performance, and one has an audience and one has an absence of audience, if you like. I think there is that perception of it. But I think looking at the elements of theatre, I think as Gavin Bolton does and has done in definition Geoff was sharing really, you know, it is that, you know, those elements of sound, silence, stillness, movement, all that theatre form. If we see it in that way, I think it can be dissolved, as Carmel suggested. I think it's, you know, we're always using theatre, and I think Dorothy would have said work that's processed, devoid of theatre, is not, you know, very productive really. So it kind of, you've got sign in performance, you've got sign in theatre, you've got sign in process. So I think, you know, like Carmel, I don't want to dwell on this question too much, but I can see that others may need to dwell on it or may need to look at it again. And I think what Gavin said in his book was like, it's about these are the theatre elements. We all understand what they are, but it's how they function. What function do we need to put them into? And we might be doing process with a class, and we might be doing performance with the same class. Yes. And I also think this whole idea of a lack of audience, I don't think there's ever a lack of an audience. So that whole definition of this is about performance, this isn't, it's not about that. Because I think we've always got somebody witnessing what we do. And I know a lot of work I've done with David, we've shared our mantles with a wider audience coming in, and you know, it's expanded into having an audience. So I think the argument about it's theatre's performance, and I think that's the bit that I want to get rid of really. I would like people to be aware of it's not about that.
We are doing theatre. When Cecily O'Neill does her process drama work, she's doing a play, creating a play. Tim?
Ofsted and others like to kind of demarcate theatre. And I think the idea of it is to do with disciplinary knowledge. And disciplinary knowledge now is plays very large in English education and the way that Ofsted frame the curriculum. And I think the way out of this is to think of it as theatre studies. What they're after are theatre studies, the study of theatre and its discipline and its forms. The word that we're using in theatre has a much wider meaning. So I think if we call it theatre studies, what they're after in Ofsted are after, that helps us to keep the word theatre and not try and say that it, you know, they're not, you know, we're doing theatre and they're doing a different kind of theatre. They're doing theatre studies is what they're doing.
The other thing that we haven't mentioned, which is a real pressure on our teachers in schools, is the theatre industry. And within more and more, they won't turn to many of the people in this room to do any leadership work on an in-service work. They go to the theatre companies, and they go there very quickly and naturally. They want to know about design. They want to know about costuming design. They want to know about writing a play. But I don't think they've this is a real... I'm being really general here, aren't I? Generalising dreadfully, sorry. But I don't think there's a real grasp of the process. You know, that we can live with that, can't we? The design, what a designer does and how a designer does it with sign, with selectivity and high significance, all the things that, you know, Dorothy used to talk about in that. So I think the process is how I've seen it, but I haven't thought of theatre studies because I've seen that as well, a kind of label which is going to take us into learning about. Learning about. That's one of the things I felt about this document, this leaked document. They were very keen for us to be appreciative of theatre structures, but there's no mention of children as theatre makers themselves. And I think that's really sad. That's at the heart of it. Stopping them doing real practical work, where the hand, you know, the vehicle of the tools of Boal, of Brecht and Heathcote, they're being denied to them because of the fear of where it might take them. I think that's there.
However, I think one of the things that is difficult is exactly what you're saying. It's within our own practice, we have the divide. And so therefore, when we're saying, okay, we need to get people like ourselves going into environments to develop, what is the drama teacher coming with in the first place? So I think it's more, for me, the conversation is actually, why did I go into drama? Because actually it was something that I could access culturally, spiritually. You know, what was the core of why I became a drama teacher? It was because it was something that allowed me to express. And if we get into the schools and kind of speak to the powers that be and talk about actually allowing more students to have more of a voice, rather than it being just the academic kind of approach to learning, then I think we'll probably be able to be heard. And Ofsted, as much as they are doom and gloom, they are in a place at the moment where they are allowing these conversations to be had, because the teaching and learning strange, the academic, is kind of not being, they're starting to see that actually you need to move and need to engage, and it's not just about reading, it's not just about the writing, get these children up and in. So I think it's the right time to start having conversations in a school environment. However, it's really hard when your own people within your department are fighting against it. So I kind of move away from the theatre and the process. I kind of go, let's start with the children. What do they need? And actually you can't learn without tapping into your creative self. So why are we not allowing our children to have the best of both worlds? So that's kind of the argument that I have. When I go in, it's kind of like, well, we came to the conclusion quite a lot of drama teachers are dyslexic. So actually you're giving me this text and I can't understand it, so let me approach it in a different way. I love the statement of, making your classroom a theatre. I can't wait to go back to school and go, wow, there's a stage. How are you engaging with that stage? How are you getting the kids up and engaging with that work? So I think it's more, rather than the theatre, the process, I think it's kind of like going back to the core of who are we here to serve and what are we serving. And if we start to take the layers away from that, no matter how academic you are, you cannot avoid the fact that creativity is a part of our essence. So if we start there, we'll win the fight.